How Steve turned the pain of losing his mother into strength to take care of himself. Chapter 1: The Day Everything Changed. It was an ordinary Tuesday, or at least that's how it began. Steve was at work, distracted by the usual flow of emails and phone calls, when his phone buzzed with a message from his sister. "Call me. It's urgent." Those 3 words would split his life into a clear before and after. In the moments that followed, he learned that his mother had suffered a sudden, massive stroke. The world around him seemed to collapse into silence, every sound muffled, every movement slow. He barely remembers the drive to the hospital, only the cold, sterile smell of disinfectant and the way his hands shook as he signed in at the reception. When he saw her, pale and still, tubes and machines keeping her alive, something inside him cracked. She had always been the strong one, the person he called when life felt unbearable, the voice that steadied him when his own thoughts were chaotic. Now, the roles had reversed in the most devastating way. That day wasn't just the day he lost his mother. It was the day he lost a part of himself. It was the beginning of a chapter where grief would shape his every decision, where survival meant finding a way to live without the person who had taught him how. Chapter 2: Numbness and the Descent into Self-Neglect. In the weeks following his mother's passing, Steve moved through life like a shadow. Friends tried to console him, but their words slid off him like rain on glass. He heard them, but nothing soaked in. Meals were skipped, not out of intention but because the idea of cooking felt meaningless. Showers became infrequent. He couldn't summon the energy to care about how he looked. His apartment turned into a silent witness of his decline. Dirty dishes piled in the sink, laundry stacked on the couch, unopened mail scattered on the table. He threw himself into work, not out of ambition but as a way to numb himself. The glow of the computer screen became a shield against the rawness of his grief. Yet at night the silence was deafening. He would lie in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying her voice in his mind, trying to remember the exact warmth of her hug, terrified of the day those memories would fade. Slowly, without even realizing it, he began abandoning himself. Ignoring his health, isolating from friends, avoiding anything that required effort or vulnerability. This wasn't living. It was existing in survival mode, and deep down, Steve knew he couldn't stay there forever. But at that moment, he had no idea how to climb out of the hole he had dug for himself. Chapter 3: The Wake-Up Call. A health scare that changed everything. It happened on a rainy Tuesday morning. Steve had been running on little sleep, too much coffee, and barely any real food for weeks. As he got out of bed, a sudden wave of dizziness hit him, forcing him to grab the edge of the dresser to steady himself. His heart was pounding, too fast, too loud, and a tightness gripped his chest. For a terrifying moment, he thought he was having a heart attack. Panicked, he called a friend, who rushed him to the urgent care clinic. After a series of tests, the doctor told him it wasn't a heart attack. It was extreme stress and exhaustion. His body was sounding the alarm that it couldn't keep running on empty. The words hit him harder than he expected. "If you keep this up, your body will force you to stop, maybe in a way you can't recover from." Sitting in that sterile room, Steve felt the weight of his own choices. He realized that his grief had turned into self-abandonment, and now his health was paying the price. His mother had always told him to take care of himself, but in the months since her passing, he had done the opposite. That thought pierced through his numbness. For the first time in months, he didn't just feel sad, he felt determined. He knew something had to change, and it had to start with him. Chapter 4: Small Steps Toward Self-Care. Steve didn't try to overhaul his life overnight. He knew from past failures that big, sudden changes rarely lasted. Instead, he started with the smallest, most manageable steps he could think of, changes so simple they were almost impossible to fail. The first thing he did was commit to drinking a full glass of water each morning before his coffee. It felt insignificant, but that single act became a signal to himself. "I'm taking care of you." He also set a bedtime alarm, not to wake up, but to remind him when to start winding down for sleep. At first, he didn't always stick to it, but even trying felt like progress. He began taking short evening walks around his neighborhood, not for exercise, but for fresh air and a mental reset. At first, he kept his headphones in to drown out his thoughts, but eventually, he started walking without music, letting his mind wander. This quiet time became a kind of moving meditation, a safe space for him to process his emotions. In the kitchen, Steve swapped out some processed meals for simple home-cooked dishes. Nothing fancy, just grilled chicken, vegetables, and whole grains. Cooking became therapeutic, a way to slow down and care for himself in a tangible way. Most importantly, he didn't beat himself up when he slipped. Instead of spiraling into guilt, he reminded himself that each day was a chance to start fresh. These small acts, repeated daily, began to build momentum. Without realizing it, Steve was laying the foundation for the discipline and strength that would eventually transform him. Chapter 5: Building a Support System. Steve had always been the type to keep his struggles to himself. He didn't want to burden anyone with his pain. And after losing his mother, he withdrew even further. But over time, he realized that healing wasn't something he could do entirely alone. Self-care wasn't just about what he did for himself, it was also about who he allowed into his life. At first, his support system started small. He reconnected with his cousin Marina, someone he had always trusted but lost touch with over the years. Their conversations were light at first, but eventually, Steve began to share more about his grief, and Marina listened without judgment. That openness gave him the courage to reach out to a few close friends, even if it was just to meet for coffee or talk about everyday life. He also joined a local grief support group, something he never thought he'd do. The first meeting felt awkward, sitting in a circle of strangers, sharing the most vulnerable parts of himself, but hearing others speak about their own losses made him feel less alone. These weren't people trying to fix him. They simply understood, and that was enough. Beyond friends and groups, Steve started seeking mentorship from people he admired, colleagues who had overcome personal challenges, neighbors who carried themselves with quiet strength. Their stories became guideposts, reminding him that resilience wasn't about never falling. It was about getting back up, again and again. Slowly, his life became filled with voices that encouraged growth instead of fueling self-doubt. Each genuine connection acted like a safety net, catching him on the days when his own strength wavered. And for the first time in a long while, Steve understood a simple truth. Self-reliance was powerful, but shared strength was transformative. Chapter 6: Creating New Routines. After months of feeling like his days were blending into one endless fog, Steve realized that if he didn't intentionally create structure, grief would keep dictating the rhythm of his life. Losing his mother had completely shattered his sense of normalcy. Meals were irregular, sleep was unpredictable, and he often found himself wandering through the day without purpose. He knew he couldn't bring back the life he had before, but he could start shaping a new one. His first step was small, waking up at the same time every morning. At first, it felt mechanical, almost pointless. But after a few weeks, that consistency gave him a sense of stability. Mornings became a quiet ritual. He would make a cup of coffee, open the curtains to let the sunlight in, and take a few minutes to journal. Writing down his thoughts wasn't always easy. Some mornings, the words were raw and heavy, but the act of putting pen to paper helped him process feelings he didn't know how to speak aloud. He also began dedicating time to movement. Steve had never been an athlete, but he found that even a 20-minute walk in the park cleared his mind in ways nothing else could. Being outside, hearing the crunch of leaves under his feet, and feeling the air on his face gave him a sense of presence that grief had stolen from him. Eventually, he added light strength training at home, not to transform his body, but to rebuild his sense of physical capability. Evenings were another opportunity for structure. Instead of numbing himself with hours of scrolling or television, he carved out time for cooking simple, nourishing meals. This was something his mother had always loved, preparing food with care, and in a way it felt like keeping a small part of her alive in his daily life. The more Steve stuck to these routines, the more he noticed a shift. His mind felt less scattered, his energy was steadier, and he began to look forward to certain parts of the day. It wasn't that the pain disappeared, it was still there, but now it existed alongside habits that reminded him he was capable of building something new, one deliberate choice at a time. Chapter 7: Rebuilding His Identity. Grief had a way of erasing Steve's sense of self. For months after his mother passed away, he felt like a shadow, someone who existed but didn't really live. His identity had been so intertwined with being her son, her helper, her constant companion, that when she was gone, he was left wondering, who am I without her? The question haunted him, but it also pushed him to start exploring. He realized that if he didn't define himself, the loss would do it for him. So, Steve began experimenting with small acts of self-discovery. He revisited old interests he had set aside, like playing the guitar, which had been collecting dust in the corner for years. At first, his fingers were clumsy on the strings, but slowly the muscle memory returned. Music became a safe place where his emotions could flow without judgment. Sometimes as quiet melodies, sometimes as raw, unpolished chords. He also challenged himself to try things he had never done before. One weekend, he joined a local photography group. He had no idea how to work a camera, but the process of learning, capturing light, framing moments, taught him to see the world in new ways. The lens became a reminder that beauty still existed, even in the smallest details, and that he was capable of finding it. Part of rebuilding his identity meant learning to make decisions for himself, not based on what others expected. In the past, he often defaulted to what was easiest or most familiar. Now, he started asking, what do I truly want? This applied to everything from the books he read, to the people he spent time with, to the way he decorated his apartment. Slowly, he was shaping a life that reflected him, not just the remnants of his old life. The process wasn't smooth. Some days he still felt lost, unsure if he was moving in the right direction. But each time he took a step toward something that felt authentic, no matter how small, he felt a flicker of pride. Rebuilding his identity wasn't about becoming a completely different person. It was about reclaiming the parts of himself that grief had buried and discovering new layers he never knew existed. Chapter 8: Living with Purpose and Self-Care. By the time Steve reached this stage in his journey, he understood something profound. Healing wasn't about getting back to who he used to be. That version of himself no longer existed, and chasing it would only keep him stuck. Instead, he realized life was about creating a new version of himself, one rooted in purpose and sustained by intentional self-care. For the first time in his life, Steve started his mornings with deliberate rituals instead of rushing straight into obligations. He'd wake up, make a cup of tea, and spend 10 quiet minutes journaling. Not about to-do lists or daily stressors, but about gratitude, emotions, and small victories. This simple act gave him clarity and a sense of grounding before the noise of the day began. Self-care, for Steve, wasn't just bubble baths or taking breaks. It was the discipline to prioritize what truly nourished him. He began exercising regularly, not to meet some arbitrary goal, but to feel strong and capable in his own body. He cooked healthy meals for himself, often recreating recipes his mother used to make, honoring her memory while also caring for his future. Purpose emerged when he realized that his own survival and growth could be used to help others. Steve began volunteering at a grief support group, sitting quietly and listening to people tell their stories of loss. Sometimes he offered words of encouragement. Other times, his presence was enough. Being able to say, "I've been there. I know it's dark now, but it won't always be this way," gave his own pain a meaning it never had before. The combination of service and self-care created a new balance in his life. Helping others reminded him of the resilience of the human spirit, while taking care of himself gave him the strength to keep showing up. He no longer saw self-care as selfish. It was the foundation that allowed him to live with purpose, without burning out or losing himself again. Steve knew grief would always be a part of his story, but it no longer defined him. His life now was guided by a deep understanding that every moment, whether joyful, painful, or quiet, was a gift. And with that awareness, he carried himself forward with both gentleness and strength, finally able to trust that he was living the life he was meant to live.